It was carnage. It was just disaster.
I heard the crash, I saw the smoke.
It came in on the county that a jet had lost its fuel tanks, and the fuel tanks had fallen into the Crossroads Shopping Center. So on a Sunday, I didn't even think about Farrell's being there.
We got trouble. You know, that's just the only way I could describe it. The flames and the explosion. At the time this occurred, this was the largest air-ground disaster in the history of the United States.
To walk in and see an F-86 aircraft parked inside the restaurant, that was just totally bizarre.
You see hundreds of things in your life, but I'd never seen or have seen since so many kids in a location, perished. It's intense.
It continues to have an impact on you when you go to a scene like that.
I'm Alex Bell, and this is a special edition of To the Point. 50 years ago, tragedy struck right here in Sacramento. The city was forever changed when a plane crashed through an ice cream parlor, killing 22 people. I sat down with 4 first responders who were all there that day, all with different experiences, but one shared mission. Their stories have gone untold until now, but I do want to warn you that the video you're about to see is disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. September 24th, 1972, an aviation show at Sacramento Executive Airport was taking flight.
In roll call, we had been advised that there was going to be an air show. That was the area that I was going to be working that particular day.
Val Scheel, now a retired police officer from the city of Sacramento, remembers an F-86 jet that attempted to take off from runway 30 at Executive Airport, but it never made it into the air.
All of a sudden, something happened a couple blocks up, and you knew it was serious, but I didn't know what it was. And before I got to that couple of blocks, the smoke cloud billowed into the air and said, "There's been a terrible disaster here." I was the first responder on scene. If anybody got there before me, it would have been split seconds.
Larry Hopkins, a veteran firefighter, happened to be off that day.
I saw stuff that wasn't supposed to be happening. There was an ambulance coming from Citrus Heights down Fruit Ridge Road, and I'm thinking, that's not right. There's something really, really wrong. When I got home, I had a fire radio, and I turned it on to find out, oh, there's a plane crash not very far from my house. By that time, it was a 3rd alarm fire.
The privately owned jet ran off the runway, traveling at more than 150 miles per hour. The plane crossed all 4 lanes of Freeport Boulevard before smashing into 3 parked cars and collided into Farrell's ice cream parlor. 22 people lost their lives that day.
12 out of the 22 were children, and the other 10, fatalities were adults.
Henry Ogg was a seasoned firefighter during the time of the crash.
It was just a total shock to arrive on the scene, and the loss of life and injury, devastation. Totally unprepared for that. The extra tragedy of a Sunday party atmosphere of ice cream parlor and a bunch of little kids having a good time, have it come to that conclusion. It was just like hard to believe that something that bad could happen to something so wonderful.
There was a whole family that lost their life.
Larry Schluer was just a cadet beginning his career. He says the Levine family, 9 people, including Gene Levine, a firefighter with the Sacramento Fire Department, all died that day.
I had worked with Gene Levine at our Station 10 in Sacramento, but I didn't know at the time that he and his wife and his daughter and all his grandkids were there. And they were all part of the very first victims.
We knew we had an immediately serious disaster. And I think I got on the radio and broadcast that we had real trouble, said that we had real problems and we need a lot of help.
How did the plane end up in the ice cream parlor?
It was 100% pilot error, we do know that. That's part of the official reports.
Meanwhile, the pilot, Richard Brigham, survived the impact.
There were several cars on Freeport Boulevard, but unfortunately one of the cars he picked up with the nose of the plane and carried it right into the Farrells with him.
I remember looking in the window, and I thought it was burnt upholstery, and I realized it was burnt skin. And looking up closer, I realized that the driver had been, bent up under the dashboard. I didn't even realize that the second victim was in there, but I did go find a battalion chief and said, "Hey, I think we got another victim here."
If you can imagine thinking your child might be inside that building that a jet had just come into contact with.
Somebody from inside the building threw a chair through the window. That's how we got the first evacuations. But I made several trips inside to evacuate people.
Somebody grabbed me and they said, "We have just pulled the airplane out a little bit and we think there's people underneath the airplane. Would you come in and go through the debris and see if we can find any more bodies, body parts or pieces?" And so I was in there with a bucket and a soup spoon going through the debris on the floor of the restaurant, just looking for bits and pieces of anything that was there. That went on for probably an hour or two.
I have clear images of some of the victims. One of the waitresses, she was only a teenager, had been thrown up on a counter and her head was kind of in the sink and the water was running down. It was almost like tears falling. It was a thought I had at the time. Something you'll never forget. This young gal was probably having fun serving kids and stuff, and it all just ended like that. And it keeps things in perspective throughout your entire life, because you know, you do live moment by moment and day by day, so you better make every day a good day.
The coroner's office actually set up a mobile morgue, which I believe is the first time in the history of the city that the mobile morgue had ever been used. You know, until they could get them identified and moved on, they had to set a morgue up in the parking lot of Farrell's.
Well, there was lots and lots of people standing by. There was blockades that keep people back a ways. There were thousands of people at that air show, and they just came across the street and to see what was going on.
The massive crowd, the people who were wanting to see what happened, and it caused a lot of problem. We couldn't get ambulances in and out. I can remember a couple of times running in front of the ambulance, pushing people out of the way so the ambulance could get in or get out. Fortunately, as you come down that particular runway, there's a berm before you get onto Freeport Boulevard. So you had 2 tanks of fuel on that jet. Well, the berm ripped those tanks off. Had those tanks been carried into Farrell's, there wouldn't have been survivors.
The building was fully sprinklered, so there was not a lot of fire damage. It didn't just erupt and burn the roof off. The ceiling was still intact. So it was still a closed up room with this huge big airplane parked in the middle of it.
It was a major, major disaster, and people came from all over.
It was one of the worst disasters in U.S. history. And it probably didn't even hit home for a while until you finally put it together and say, yeah, this was really, really bad.
Responding to this disaster was just half of the battle. What these first responders didn't realize is the impact it would have on them in the decades to come. Farrell's never reopened. In the early 2000s, the city of Sacramento built a memorial at the site. When you went home later that night, could you understand what had just happened?
I had for several days what today we would probably refer to as PTSD. In those days, we just said, suck it up and do it. You didn't sleep well for a few days. You just cope with it. You just do it.
The psychology of incidents has greatly changed nowadays than what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. After Farrell's, nobody did anything. You just go back to work the next day and say, okay, we'll go for the next one. And post-traumatic stress syndrome never even occurred to anybody. That was just part of the job. Forget it. And go on and do the next job. So that part has drastically upgraded and changed an awful lot for the new people that are on board now.
My heart goes out to victims, but it does make you have a spiritual understanding. I have a lot of questions if I get to the pearly gates. There's a lot of things I want explained how life works.
There's a memorial to the victims out what is now the Public Safety Building on Freeport Boulevard. When I'm in Sacramento, I will frequently stop by there, say a little prayer.
My role in that was minimal, but I was called to be there.
But it seems like it had an impact on the rest of your career and your perception.
Yeah, the appreciation for what we can do for people when they're in trouble, that's what we do. We come to the aid of people, and it's just been a tremendous satisfaction for me all my life, and even in my days off, I've always tried to be helpful.
I've been doing this my entire adult life. It's gratifying to be able to make someone's life a little bit better. Anytime a firefighter is dealing with the public, it's in their worst day. And to the firefighter, it's just another day. And you have to kind of put that aside and say, okay, we're going to deal with this problem. We'll try to make it better.
To be a human being and have empathy and sympathy for others is a part of humanity. And being a firefighter, you're blessed to be able to go out and serve fellow human beings and make life a little better in a moment in time. To infuse that spirit of service, and I think it's important in basically every walk of life. If you're a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you're a firefighter, if you're a pilot, give people some history and the background and meaning behind it, the romance of life. Every occupation should have some romance tied to it.
A Sacramento fire captain took that romance to heart and created the largest regional burn unit in Northern California. We'll introduce you to the man who started it all. The 22 lives that were lost in Sacramento's deadliest plane crash were not in vain. When the crash happened, there wasn't a specialized place in the area for burn treatment. Late Sacramento fire captain Cliff Haskell wanted to change that. The crash left a scar on the city, and while scars never fade, Cliff proved they do heal.
When the crash happened, Cliff was in the department. There were many people injured, and there was no burn center here in Sacramento. In fact, burn care at that time was pretty limited to the Army bases taking care of military soldiers coming back from war. And so when big burns would happen, people would be transported to like Fort Sam, Houston, and other places. That's when Cliff said, we really need to have a burn center in our own community. Cliff did an excellent job of setting up a payroll deduction system through the local, Firefighters Union local, and probably raised about $125,000 a year. That was just from firefighters wanting to support the burn center, knowing that they, on any given day, might be a burn survivor themselves, that they might get burned, that they might need a burn center.
Well, when the plane crashed, he contacted our union, and they together created this charity. And one of the first things that came out of the charity was UC Davis opened the first burn unit.
Cliff worked really hard to get the burn center here in Sacramento.
Nobody wanted to open a burn unit here. Burn care is not only very expensive, but a lot of the people that get burnt have no coverage.
As firefighters, we got into the profession to help people. And Cliff took it to another level. When he saw that we did not have that burn care here, he said we could do better, and he did, and he was a driving force for that.
I think that Cliff was touched by the impact of that crash, by the burn care professionals who worked every day to save people. His heart was truly in that. Cliff was the executive director here. He volunteered 20-some years of his life as a retired fire captain from Sacramento City as the executive director. He asked me if I would come on board and help him start some of the programs. Probably one of the biggest fundraisers we started was the Fill the Boot for Burns. I think over time got to a point that it was raising close to $500,000. Those other firefighters in those other communities started doing boot drives in their communities as well.
I always would tell people, out of a tragedy came something good, this charity. The charity still raises money for the people that work at those burn units, the doctors, the nurses, all the different technicians, a lot of continuing education for them. I just had somebody mention that to me the other day. You guys just help firefighters, right? And I go, no.
We're here to serve the community, and we certainly focus on people that have been at Shriners and UC Davis, but we serve a community well beyond that. We don't care where they're from or what state they're in. If we can support them, we will support them.
So we'll help them with whatever they need, hotels, meals, whatever, we're there for them.
What we recognized is that it's not just the care that's given at the hospital. That's huge. Again, they were getting some of the finest care you can get in this nation. But what we started realizing is the aftercare. It's when these individuals, especially our kids, They come out if they're burned when they're young. Every time they have a growth spurt, they need a new graft. So they're continually coming back. So I think that emotional support has been huge, and to let them know that they're a part of a community. A lot of burn survivors that I've met over the years went years without really knowing anybody else that had a burn injury. And by pulling these individuals together, there's power in that. The person that maybe had their burn injury 5 years ago can speak to somebody that just had theirs and be able to say, I know where you've been. I was there myself, but here I am now.
The scar tissue, the injuries themselves, the reconstructive surgery that needs to take place over years. And we did a summer camp for burn injured children where those kids could just be kids. They all had scars. They all might have been missing fingers or having reconstructive surgeries, but the firefighters made that the best camp that exists in the country, and it became known as the Firefighters Kids Camp, not the summer camp for burn injured children. We really wanted to eliminate that whole burn injury thought, and this was a place of recovery and just being with other kids who are just like you.
Sacramento has the best burn care probably anywhere in the world. These people that work here are amazing. The surgeons work not only at UC Davis, but they work at Shriners. If you ever go to one of the burn units, it's very common to see one of the doctors walking across the street back and forth. They're amazing people. I have never met hardly anybody so dedicated to what they do, their profession, as them.
With many of these guys and gals, they didn't know if they were going to get out. So even though that they're safe now, there was a moment that they didn't know if they were going to make it or not. And that really can eat at you, and having somebody up here to talk to is very important.
Cliff, tall guy, quiet. I love the man. He was a great guy. His whole life was not only being a firefighter, but running this charity. The two burn units probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Cliff.
Cliff's legacy is forever cemented in the burn unit on Stockton Boulevard. Just like Cliff, the first responders we introduced you to never stopped working. They are busy preserving the spirit of service long after they retired. The Sacramento Regional Fire Museum houses the history of local firefighters, past and present. Firefighting has come a long way, and the museum serves as a time capsule to show improvements that have saved countless lives and inspired future generations.
There is a lot of fire service history in this area. Goes back to the 1840s, 1850s, and it's very unique. The Gamewell fire alarm system, that is unique, and I don't know if you will find one operational like that anywhere on the West Coast. It's Sacramento's Gamewell system was installed in the 1930s and taken out in the 1990s. And we were able to rescue it from getting demolished and reinstall it here, and one of our members has been working to get it fully operational. We consider it our crown jewel because it's so unique, and we have people that come in just to see that. When you pull the street box, it rings the bells in the dispatch center. You know, it's really neat, especially if they get a chance to. Always wanted to pull the street box and make it work and see what happens. We've actually been acquiring them for almost 30 years now. It's not just for the public, but for the newer firefighters today too, to understand where they came from, what their background is. Some of the tools that were used before are totally non-existent today, and to understand how they developed everything from rescue tools to medical equipment for medical aid calls. We try to capture all that here. With young kids coming in here that have an interest, if they didn't, usually when they leave, they do have an interest in it. We try to educate them. We let them climb on some of the apparatus so they get the feel of it. It's something a lot of us used to do when we were kids, but we could go to the local firehouse. It's not as easy to do today, but here they can come and experience that, have that same experience.
If you want to experience the museum for yourself, we have everything you need to know on abc10.com/tothepoint. We told you this story because the 22 people who lost their lives and the first responders who answered the call changed our city for the better. Stories write history. Stories change lives. If you don't tell your story, who will?